Welcome back to another episode of the Highway Boys channel. We have recently updated or upgraded that name, the Highway Specialist, just to reflect a little social maturity and what it is we do. That name kind of came about, Highway Boys, because the channel was originally established to kind of talk about the various things I learned traveling up and down the highways and byways of the United States. I have lived and worked in 7 different states, probably 12 different communities around the United States, particularly in the Midwest region, uh, upper part of the South. And I've just encountered so many different people, so many different types of scenarios. And I thought there was some value to those experiences, and sharing that with the public is something that I'm passionate about. So we're going to talk about everything from current events and politics to spirituality to uh, transportation, all types of things. So I want you to tune in, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and continue to tune in. And as this channel develops, I think you'll like some of the things that you hear here. Um, at any rate, the last few videos that I have done have been about Black accountability. Uh, we were talking about what we can learn from the various high-profile tragedies of Breonna Taylor, Trayvon Martin, Nipsey Hussle, and trying to see what we can glean and change or upgrade our behavior so that we could experience more positive outcomes. In those videos, I intentionally left out the racial aspects because I wanted us to focus on the community, focus on our own conduct. This video, however, I want to take a look at how that racism kind of impacts the community uh, in a specific time frame. Though I want to talk kind of about the 80s and 90s, a little bit before that, and what's so unique about this time period is that at the same time, crack cocaine was really exploding onto the scene. So you had this exclusion that a lot of African Americans were experiencing, while this very welcoming, what appeared to be a golden opportunity, was emerging in their communities. For a lot of young men, it was a very easy decision to make, unfortunately. But I like to paint a picture before I go into this because I think there's a little bit of misconception about what the Black community was like at this time. And I can just really kind of speak from myself. I lived through that. I saw that as it was happening in real time. So up until the 80s, especially in places like Detroit that had a strong Black middle class, most of the homes were two-parent households. Most of our parents were educated, very educated. Most of them many were private school educated, especially in places like Detroit. And I'll tell you why. Like, if you talk to some of the older people in Detroit, they will tell you that in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, it was very, very dangerous for Black people in Detroit public schools as a result of racism. In 2009, 2010, I spoke with the late, great John Witherspoon after a show he did at Comedy Off Broadway in Lexington, Kentucky. And he kind of confirmed this, something that I already knew. But after the show, we had a chance to chop it up a little bit. And once he learned that I was from Detroit, he wanted to share some of those experiences. And the main thing that he talked about was how difficult it was to go to Detroit public schools. He explained that they had to fight a lot with groups of teens and young adults that didn't want them going to the same schools as they were. A lot of white kids were violent towards them, and this was so regular and it was so frequent that a lot of people decided to pull their children out of the Detroit public school system. Um, and what they did was put their children in the private schools, especially Catholic schools. These schools were immigrant friendly, they were minority friendly, but more importantly, they offered a curriculum that many cases was more challenging and superior to the curriculum that was offered by the public school system. It was relatively affordable. There was different types of tuition assistance, and if you went to a Catholic church, you got even more discounts. So there were some ways in which even relatively poor family could send their children to these Catholic schools. But this was mostly middle class. They had to pay for uniforms and things of that nature, but it worked out. So going back, uh, so again, these folks were all very educated. They had come from two-parent households. They were also very religious too. Black people were at church every Sunday. It wasn't uncommon for a family to go to church 2, 3 times a week. You had Sunday service, you had Bible study, typically sometime during the week. And if they were active, as a lot of black families were, they were typically involved in the choir or the usher board or the deacons. you know, that would cause, the average black family, to be at church 2 times a week at least, sometimes three or more, depending on what they were involved in, because the church was also the center of black civic life. There were always programs and different types of things going on at the church that required the family to be present. And so that's what was going on, you know. Um, I just say all this to say that at this time period, uh, Black America was definitely equal to their white counterparts, at least academically, morally, spiritually. They had reached a very high level uh, in many communities, especially those like Detroit that had that strong middle class. Uh, But nonetheless, they were not allowed to climb the corporate ladder. There were still a lot of companies at this time that didn't have a single black employee. That's the case today at a lot of companies, but you can only imagine that back then it was even worse. And they were relegated to the bottom rungs of these operations when they were employed at these factories, warehouses, or whatnot. Even when those operations were smack dab in the middle of their communities, you found them relegated to the bottom rungs. Very few black leaders. I mean, you got to think about it that the first black man wasn't a CEO of a major corporation until Cliff Wharton Jr. became CEO in 1987. The first black woman to be a CEO of a major corporation was Ursula Burns, and that didn't even happen until 2009. So we talking about the 70s, 80s, 90s time period. It was very difficult, very challenging for a black person to go into a company and climb the social ladder. So as a result, very few of them attain the financial security that would allow them to really improve their social standing. Even those that did, they couldn't get out of the ghetto. And this is partially because there were racial covenants written into the deeds of a lot of property, into the contracts were written policies that basically said that property could not be sold or rented to people of color. So even those that had the money, they lived in the ghetto. Uh, and this practice was outlawed by the Fair Housing Act of 1968, but there was no way that the federal government could enforce it. I mean, think about all the communities across the United States. It would have literally taken thousands of agents just dedicated to that, to investigate claims that law had been violated or broken, and to enforce it, to uh, encourage people to do the right thing. It would have took thousands of agents, and that just couldn't be done. So even though it was illegal to do it, those practices continued well into the new millennium. Um, so as a result, these good people that were educated and whatnot, they would live right up the block from a crack house, and there wasn't nothing they could really do about it. They kids went to school with gang members, and there was very little that they could do about it. Um, a lot of these people, they end up getting old and dying broke. Uh, even though a lot of them were the best that American society had to offer, a lot of them was World War II vets, Korean War vets, Vietnam vets. They had impeccable work ethic. A lot of them, they were doing back-breaking labor for decades in those factories and warehouses. This was before technology had been implemented. There was no robots yet. All of this computer stuff came later. So they were engaged in this very hard, arduous labor, but they did it, and they encouraged their children to work very early. We all had paper routes at 12 years old. We caddied at golf courses. After that, we were at the fast food restaurants. Very early in our lives, we were taught to work, taught the value of a dollar, but still not seen fit to be neighbors in some of these better communities and better neighborhoods that were predominantly Caucasian. We were not seen fit to be co-workers at some of the more prestigious companies. So, you know, by the mid to late 80s, that situation had reinvigorated a very anti-establishment, anti-social, even anti-religious, anti-Western society altogether attitude, and it kind of culminated with the youth, large swaths of youth choosing the streets. It's like, what's the point of doing the right thing and playing by the rules if you have no hope of winning? If you play by the rules, right? So if you good and you do what they say do, and you still dealing with roaches, rats, extreme violence. It was easy for those children, and we talking about kids, but it's like, their mindset was, you might as well join the mob. At least that way you had a chance of making it out, or at least having a comfortable spot in hell. I mean, all of the property, the businesses was owned by dope men, hustlers. They owned all the barbershops and beauty salons, all the beeper and cell phone shops, the little clothing stores, the soul food restaurants. All of that stuff was owned by drug dealers, uh, and foreigners. Were becoming a factor too. But our parents didn't own anything. And again, a lot of these people was good folks, veterans. Church going, God fearing people, very educated, and they didn't have nothing. Very few of them owned anything. So it was easy, for a lot of guys to choose the mob. We didn't see a lot of options. I mean, at this time, the only black person on MTV was Michael Jackson. I mean, we had not yet even made inroads into entertainment and even sports at this time, the way that we have today. So at those times, during that time period, the options were seen as very, very limited. Um, and we know the human brain don't fully develop until age 25. So when you got kids looking at this and seeing their parents struggle, seeing their grandparents die broke, even though they were all doing the right thing and loved this country and believed in God, and still dying broke, man, it was super easy for them to pick up a gun. So, that's kind of what I want to talk about is, as I would want to point out as far as, how racism impacted criminality. Back then we couldn't even go across 8 Mile. Um, they had a mall, Northland, was right there on 8 Mile in Greenfield, whatever, 8 Mile in Southfield. Uh, you couldn't go much further than that. I mean, they let you come up there and spend your money. There was a little movie theater slightly beyond that, But until the 80s, late 80s, you wasn't really allowed to go beyond that. And that's where a lot of the good jobs were, the better houses, a lot of the resources was out there in Southfield, Oak Park, different parts of Oakland County. And you was not allowed out there. If you went out there, it was almost guaranteed that you was going to be pulled over. So the lucky few that was able to find jobs and stuff out there that would let them in, they was often harassed by law enforcement going to and from. They would rack up so many tickets that they couldn't afford to pay them. And they end up, losing those jobs and stuff, and which was the point. So Black people during this time period, had experienced a lot of exclusion that was harmful, that just made doing the wrong thing that much easier. Not looking to place blame. I'm just pointing out the historical facts, as I saw them living through this time period, not on book, not on paper, not on some television commercial, TV show, or, just from my own personal experience, this is what I saw. So thank you for tuning in to the Highway Boys channel, now known as the Highway Specialist. Continue to tune in, hit that like and subscribe, and we're going to talk about some more stuff. Thanks.